Welcome to part 3 of what to do between IB years 1 and 2, what to do over summer. As a review of what parts 1 and 2 were about, parts 1 and 2 both had to do with revising and condensing all of those notes from your classes. Part 1 was why we're doing this, why we're taking the time over summer, and generally how you can do this for all the subjects. And then part 2 was specific to IB history. Now what we're going to do is go into the other thing you should do over summer. You should revise or prepare for your internal assessment. Now, as I said in part 1, I recognize that most subjects haven't started their internal assessment. History definitely has. Rough drafts have been written. And so that's why I'm providing kind of this open space for revise or prepare. And doing both is actually going to be very beneficial in the long run. So here we go with memes. Sometimes my students call me Miss McMeme. Not that often though. So we have internal assessments everywhere. And when you know all your IAs are due in the same week, teachers try to not make this happen, but just with the nature of curriculum building, it sometimes happens. And so more than likely you will have IAs due around the same time, college apps, etc., other projects. And so what you want to do is get ahead where you can. So if you've already started your internal assessment, for example, the historical investigation with history, take the summer to revise it. I cannot stress the importance of it. You were probably so over it as soon as you finished writing that rough draft, but you're not done and it probably needs lots of improvement. So what you need to do is revise it. You have this time, make it better. You've gotten feedback, you've gone through the process, you have time, take it. Especially with the way that we structured at our school, now you're going to go into year 2 and your teacher is going to help you refine it. You want to show your teachers that you put the effort in. Effort, work ethic really goes a long way. So really take the time to respond to your teacher's feedback. Now, if you haven't started your internal assessment, I would really suggest preparing for it. Basically, just set yourself a map of what you want to do with that IA, kind of prepare yourself ahead of time. What is this IA even going to be? Now, why do this? Because it's going to help you maybe start seeing, wow, this stuff from year 1, this stuff was important, but this stuff wasn't for my IA. You can start filtering through what stuff's going to be helpful. Maybe create a Google Doc or a Google folder for that stuff that could be handy for your IA. You're also going into year 2 thinking ahead. I know that I'm going to have to do this for my IA, and so I'm going to keep my eye out for certain things, and when I hear my teacher say something, when I learn something, read something in the textbook, do an assignment that's related, I'm going to make sure to also file that away in my IA Google folder or Google Doc or whatever you're keeping. You can also go ahead and prep questions ahead of time before school gets into the craziness of everything going on. You can have those questions prepared and then you can go ahead and ask your teacher at the appropriate time after they've gone through and explained the directions. So these are why you want to get ahead on those internal assessments, and now how. So for revising or preparing your internal assessment, for revising, for example, the historical investigation, definitely adjust based on your teacher's feedback. Your teacher took time to give you feedback, make sure to improve it. And just want to point out, just because your teacher didn't correct something or write something doesn't mean that that part that they didn't mark is totally okay. You have to start noticing the trends. Oh, my teacher said something about this evidence. Let me see if the rest of my evidences, even if they aren't marked, if those are also following that feedback the teacher wrote on just that one evidence. Self-evaluation is also a really important tool that comes in handy for college and your career. So you want to go ahead and take that IB mark band and grade your own internal assessment based on the mark band and see where you fall if you have a good grasp of that internal assessment. Ultimately asking yourself, did I accomplish what I set out to do? Did I answer the question in my HI? Did I do whatever it is you do for the other IAs? Ask yourself that question and adjust accordingly. And kind of the beauty over summer is you can just do a little bit at a time. For example, the HI, you could do section 1 one day, part of section 2 the next, maybe take a week off, and just really spread it out. Now, how can you prepare for your internal assessments? That mark band, the rubric, is the key to everything. It tells you exactly what you need to do. It is how you will be graded. And so familiarize yourself with it. What is the differentiation between lower marks and top marks? What's going to move you to the higher level? Are there multiple sections? Do sections have different points allocated towards them? I would also search around online, try to find examples, talk to IB alum that you know to get a grasp of what the experience is like, what hindsight do they have, what tips and tricks do they have. I also personally really learn well through examples and seeing what someone else did. And so that kind of helps me get my gears going when I'm trying to create something. I would also really suggest, once you familiarize yourself with the IA by looking over the directions and mark band, I would go through your year one material and start listing out what would be helpful to your IA. What did you do in year one that you could apply to that internal assessment? Keep it in a Google Doc, keep it on a list, whatever is more your jam. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go specifically into history. So if you're not in IB history, feel free to peace out at this point. Or if you would like to just see how to break down a mark band, even though it's not for a class you take, feel free to keep with the video. And then last but not least, if you're in IB history, you should definitely listen. So this is the HI mark band. It's very important to note that it's broken down into 3 criterion A, B, and C. And so what you need to do is really look at what separates. For example, in criterion A, how can I go from a 3 to 4 to a 5 to 6? And so if your teacher marked you at like a 3, how are you going to move up into the next category? You need to really analyze what the descriptor says under the criterion. So it's also important to note how much each section is worth. Section 1 is worth 6 points, Section 2, 15, and Section 3 is 4 points. So you have to start strategically planning. If you decide to just throw away Section 2, that's probably a mistake. No, that's not probably a mistake. That is a mistake. That is worth 15 points. That's over half the points for your internal assessment. So what you want to do is make sure you put the focus in where it's really needed. On average, it's also important to know approximately an 11 to 13 is passing. However, you do want to aim higher for that because this score for your internal assessment will contribute to your overall IB history score. And so you want to try to maximize the IA score because your IA, you get time to work on it and it's not done in an exam crunch time. After looking at the mark band, you want to ask yourself, which section should you focus your most effort on? Clearly, Section 2, it's worth 15 points, a majority of the points. Also, you can ask yourself which sections might be a little easier. That might help you plan on how to tackle this. Do I want to start with the easiest section first in revising it and then move on to the harder, or would I rather tackle the harder and then finish off with the easier section? Section 3 is the reflection. It's only worth 4 points. It should be the section that you automatically get those points. You're reflecting as a historian. Major mistakes I see students make is they end up too general and too vague with their reflections. They're not being specific to their investigation. Be specific to what your question is asking, the time period, the country, whatever it may be. Make sure you're being specific to that and being genuine about the feedback. Think about the process that a historian has to take. So really take the time, go section by section, and improve. Some other tips I have are going to be how to specifically revise for your historical investigation. These are questions that I suggest that my students ask themselves and then go through and take action based on them. Big one. Does my evidence actually answer my question? Is it CARS worthy, credible, accurate, relevant, specific? Does it drive your claim home? So you really need to make sure that that evidence actually answers the question and it doesn't just say what you want it to. I found myself writing that as I was marking my students' paper. Your evidence doesn't quite say that. So you need to make sure to do that. You might also combine 2 pieces of evidence from 2 different sources or from 2 different places in the same source to show those connections and show the relationships to get your claim across. So If your evidence doesn't actually answer your question, maybe you need to adjust your question. Maybe you need to research more. Maybe you need to do both. And so that's what you're going to determine. And if you're not sure, you can map out some ideas, and that way you can go into year 2 asking your history teacher for help, but coming in with specific questions for guidance makes such a big difference in the revision process. Did I follow the directions for formatting? Make sure that you format the HI correctly. Did I recognize the counterclaims? Looking back at the mark band in section 2, to get high marks in section 2, you're going to need to have, just like on paper 3, an evaluation of different perspectives. It's the first sentence on the very bottom line right there, the bottom section. And so you need to make sure I'm recognizing the counterclaims, I'm overcoming the counterclaims. Also, you might need to research more. Most of my students need to research more. They need to vary up their sources, primary, secondary, different types of people, statistics, personal accounts, etc. They also need to go back and find more historiography. Finding historiography will not only boost your score by bringing in those different perspectives, but it will also help you develop your arguments. Summer's actually also a great time. I know databases at schools can be somewhat limited, so you can go ahead and, with your extra time, maybe go to the local community college and see what databases they have and try to increase the amount of sources and depth of sources that you have. Some more questions. Did you cite everything? Just because you didn't do a direct citation doesn't mean it doesn't get cited. Paraphrases get cited. Anything that you did not know prior to this investigation needs to be cited. Does your HI logically flow and make sense? Sometimes we get so caught up with putting in the evidence, filling in all the pieces, that when it comes together, it doesn't make sense. So what I would suggest doing is going back and recreating an outline. And then you can visually see, how is this all piecing together? Create a graphic organizer. And then, to help develop your analysis and the connections, talk aloud your ideas. Typically, people can articulate better verbally than in writing, or I've seen that with students. And so I would really suggest going through, talking it through, recreating an outline. And always remember, everything needs to come back to your thesis, because your thesis is your answer to your question, which is overall what you are trying to do with this internal assessment is answer that question. So make sure everything is relevant to your thesis. Please make sure that you proofread and edit. I know that there's nothing on the mark band for this, but you don't want to do anything to potentially irritate your reader, confuse your reader. So please just be cognizant, take the time, make sure periods are where they're supposed to be, things are spelled correctly. Also, you cannot have hanging quotes. A hanging quote means you just pretty much slap it in there. You have to have your own words with it. The easiest thing is to go ahead and put it at the beginning. For example, or as historian blank has stated. So make sure that you don't have hanging quotes. So these are my tips and tricks on how to either revise or prepare for your internal assessments. Definitely worth it, and suggest you take the time to do so.